My name is Shelley Weiner. I never had a childhood. I never had a friend, and I never had a toy.
My name is Raya Kishnerman, and my childhood was as bad as it could be. I never had friends. I never had toys. I didn't go to school before the war. The only friend to play with is my cousin Shelley.
I was born in the city of Rivne. My father was a businessman. My mother had a grocery store that she ran from the bottom of our house. She had it set up. And I had a very happy childhood before the war. My grandfather spoiled me terribly. He would take me to his house and put me on the table, and I could do whatever I wanted, kick the dishes, dance.
I was born in Rivne too, but I lived in a village called Myatin, which is 5-6 kilometers from Rivne. My parents had a little business in that village. They were producing lime and selling it. They did have livestock, which my mother was taking care of. My childhood was really nice. I had a lot of girlfriends, especially in the summer when the Roma would come into the woods. I would play with the Roma girls, and we did have a wonderful time.
The Germans came into our town, and immediately they started passing laws against what Jews could and couldn't do. And one of the laws that they passed is they wanted all the males, all the men, to report for relocation work duty. My grandfather had a suspicion that this was not really where they were taking the men. So he lived next door, and he created a hiding place in my mother's house for all the men. He had 7 sons, and my mother had brothers-in-laws, and all the men would spend the day there hiding, and then they'd come out for the midday meal. My cousin Raya and I would play outside in the yard, and we were told that if we saw the Nazis, they were called brown shirts, coming down the street to come in and tell the adults. And one day we were playing out there, and we saw a Jeep with 4 of these men in the brown shirt uniforms stopping at our neighbors. We ran in and told the adults. All the men ran back to the hiding place. The women cleaned up. But my uncle, Raya's father, remained. The next thing I remember is that these men burst in, they locked the door, they wouldn't let us leave that room, and they proceeded to beat my uncle.
And I was screaming, seeing that beating of my father, so they threw us out of the room. They squeezed me in between a wall and a kitchen table.
The next thing that happened is that my mother got us to the village of Myatin. This was after they had the massacre in Rivne, and they killed 17,500 Jews in 3 days. And my entire family was killed in that massacre. My grandfather, my uncles, my aunts, and my cousins. The only person that survived was my father. He was taken to Russia in the army.
My mother had this premonition that something is going to happen in the city, and she wanted to go back to the village. At the time, the city was already surrounded by Germans. My mother, I, and my father went to the outskirts of the city, and my father decided to go back. For some reason, he was very scared that the Germans will catch us. My mother knew a lot of wooden trails, and she was trying to persuade my father that we can do it. We can get out of the city and get to the village. But he didn't want it. The only thing he had is his passport. He gave it to her and went back to the city. I and my mother by foot went through the woods and came to the village unharmed. The passport is the only thing that I have of my father, and this is the only memory that I have. The next day, my mother decided to go to the city and see what's going on there. Where's my father? Where's the whole family? And when she came there, nobody was there. And people were telling that all the Jews were taken out of the city to a little place called Sosanki, and they were all killed. So my mother went to that place of killing, of the massacre, and she saw that the Ukrainian police was there, the Germans were there, and people, especially the police, they were taking all the princely possessions that the people brought over there, putting them on the wagons and taking home. So then she knew that all our family is killed, and she was horrified, and with that she came back to the village and told us the whole story, that now nobody's left but the four of us: Shelley, her mother, I, and my mother.
Natalia and Nicanor Palishchuk made a hiding place for us in their barn where they kept the straw and hay. I remember standing and watching them put it on the space where they kept that, and they filled that up until they left a small space for the four of us to sit down, to lie down, but we couldn't really stand up. We were at the back of the barn where they have some eaves that you can look out. That was the only light that we had and the only air that we had. And as a little girl, I would tell my mother, please, please, please let me go out and play with the chickens and the kitty cats. They can walk around there, but I can't.
The people that hid us, I was a little older than Shelley, so I have more memories. Natalia and her husband, this family, they had 5 children. They had 1 girl and 4 sons.
The only thing I know about Natalia and Nicanor is that they took turns bringing us the food. Our biggest problem were the rats and the mice and the lice. So we had a blanket. Once a month, she took our clothes, and we wrapped in the blankets, and they were rough blankets, and she would put them in the oven to kill the lice. The thing that I remember about the hiding in the barn was that Raya and I would play with the straw. We would make animals out of the straw. We would make dolls. Those were the only toys we had. And our mothers would tell us stories. That is how we passed the time away. Altogether, I think we were in the barn maybe 20 months. The scariest night of my life was when Nicanor came up and told our mothers that they were coming for us. They knew we were there, and that we should come down. Well, our mothers said, could we have a little time to say goodbye to each other? And to this day, I don't know what possessed us, but Raya and I guess I was 5 and she was 6 at the time, started crying and begging our mothers not to go quietly, that we should run into the woods. We knew there was a back door to the barn. And somehow our mothers agreed to do it, and that is what we did.
From the woods, at daytime, we were hiding in the fields. It was very hot. We had no food, no water. The sun was unbelievably hot. And this is where we sat for 3 days. All we could eat is the raw grain from the rye. And then Nicanor, he was calling on us. So he actually didn't know where we are, but he was calling on us. And we heard him, and we came back to the house, to the bunker, actually. They built an underground bunker to hide their grain and mainly to hide their daughter that was a young girl, and at the time they would take the young girls to Germany. The bunker was a dark, damp place. All they had there is straw that we were laying on. Rats and mice were in thousands running around. We didn't have almost no food, just a little bit to keep us alive. Nicanor took our mothers on a wagon and took them to Rivne. And I and Shelley, we stayed in the village, still in that house, until our mothers would know if it's safe to take us back to Rivne.
Nicanor came and he took us out of the hole underground and put us in his wagon and covered us with straw and drove us to Rivne. It was a sunny day. There was snow on the ground, and it was blinding. We couldn't see anything because we had been in the darkness for so long. But the war was not over. The Germans were bombing our city, Rivne, very frequently. And Raya and I would sit and look for the formations, actually, of the planes to see when there would be a raid. The bombing was so terrible that our mothers decided to take us out of Rivne and move us to a smaller town. The night after we left, a bomb fell on our house and destroyed it totally. In 1945, May, the war was over. Stalin made a decree. Anybody who was a Polish citizen could go to Poland. So we got to Poland, and my mother and her brother opened up a restaurant, and I stayed with a gypsy lady. One day there was a knock on the door, and it was my father. He had survived the war, gone back to Rivne, found out where we were, and came to get us. From Poland, my mother and father and I made our way to the American zone in Germany. There we were placed in DP camps, displaced person camps, people without a country. We were there for 3 years, and eventually my father's family brought us to the United States. I came here in 1949 on Columbus Day.
In 1945, when Shelley and my Aunt Eva went to Poland, I and my mother stayed in a little town called Korec. My mother was working as a photographer there. We lived in that little town till 1956. My mother was married to a man that lost his family during the war, but he had a brother in St. Petersburg, and so he decided that we should move to St. Petersburg, and so we did. That was in 1957 or 58.
After 1945, we had no idea, no connection with Raya and her mother because they were not in Rivne. We didn't know where they were until in the late 60s, my mother was walking on the street in Tel Aviv. A man recognized her and he came over to her and said, "I know where your sister is. I just saw her." In 1974, I went to St. Petersburg, where Raya was living at the time, with her husband Anatoly and son Genya and my Aunt Sonia. And it was the first time I saw them since we left in 1945. We told them if they ever wanted to leave, we would help them get to the United States.
In 1974, when Shelley and her mother came to visit us, I just couldn't believe it's them, that not everybody is killed. All the memories came back.
In 2013, Raya and I went back to Myatin because we were in touch with the farmer's grandson, and he knew our story. I didn't know what my emotions would be when I got there, but when we came to the farm and we saw the barn where we were hidden, I was totally disbelieved that this could really have happened in that space and that time. But I knew that it did. I knew that that's where we were. But it seemed so small, and so just couldn't understand how 2 little girls could have survived in that place. The house we walked in, we recognized it immediately. The thing that we talked about right away was what we remembered from the hiding. And it wasn't that we were hungry. It was that we were hot and cold in winter and summer. And for me, it was very good way to kind of close a part of my life and to be there with Raya that experienced the same exact thing as I did.
Going back to the hiding place in 2013 was very, very emotional. The people that he does passed away a long time ago. But the hiding place was still there, and it was the same way exactly as we left it in 1945. The only person that lived there is a daughter-in-law of the people that hid us. At the time that we were hiding, she did not know anything about us. But her son, her grandchildren, and they were very, very happy to see us.
I have often wondered how the Polishchuk family had such strength and bravery to do what they did, to hide us, 4 people, when they knew that the punishment would be death for them and their children, and all their property would be confiscated. I am not sure how I would react in the same situation. I don't think that many of us know how we would react. But I do know that they were extremely brave and caring to do what they did, to put up with the fear, the deprivation, and everything that was going on around them.